What we found was that most Australians who had accessed their super were spending it primarily on discretionary spending. That's restaurants, automotive, clothing, the type of expenditure that's more about lifestyle than about essentials. The other fact we discovered was that 40% of people who withdrew superannuation had actually had no net income drop prior to taking out that superannuation. That means that either their income and wages hadn't fallen, or their income falls were more than offset by increases in government payments like JobKeeper, JobSeeker, or stimulus. So many Australians were withdrawing super because they could, not because they needed to.
Mm. I mean, perhaps plenty of them did it in anticipation. I know there's a lot of stories of banks with deferrals. They deferred loans. They've contacted the bank since and say, hey, we'd like to keep paying this back. It's not so much the issue of anyone that could access the super, I suppose, but once that has happened, the indication from these figures is if they don't need it for essentials, instead of putting it back in, they're spending it on, well, not quite luxury items, but things that aren't going to help them in retirement one day.
That's right. You know, what we saw from the ATO data last week was that young Australians had disproportionately withdrawn superannuation under this scheme. And it was very easy for them to do so. You know, it is a 5-minute online application, and then within 5 days, you can get access to up to $10,000. So it's very easy to withdraw, but I think maybe what was less understood was just how costly those withdrawals might be. For someone in their 20s and they withdraw the $10,000 now, and then the second $10,000 they're also entitled to withdraw next financial year, that could end up costing them $120,000 at retirement. So a very expensive way to maintain living standards now. And for those people who took it out in order to buy beer and pizzas, it might be the most expensive beer and pizzas of their lives.
So the scheme, it's worth remembering, as you mentioned there, is twofold. One, initial amount you could have taken out so far. The second $10,000 you can access as of next financial year, which is only a month away. It does give pause for thought as to whether the scheme should open. I suppose, though, as well, if it does remain with the same sort of threshold, we might see many fewer people actually going for the second $10,000.
Well, I hope so. I also think the government needs to take the opportunity to review the scheme. The eligibility criteria are extremely broad. We've already had 1.5 million people registering to use the scheme, and you can use the scheme if you have been unemployed, made redundant, are a sole trader with an impacted business, or had a reduction of in 20% of hours. There's no specific time frame that's specified by the documentation, and so that potentially applies to millions of young people whose hours normally fluctuate on a week-to-week basis in the course of 6 months. Secondly, I think the government needs to think about whether or not they introduce an income check or require some documentation. Currently, there is no requirement for any supporting evidence or documentation before people access this money. That's another opportunity for the government to rethink as they go into the next stage of this scheme.
Nearly out of time, but just on the non-essentials and what that includes, I know 11% gambling online, which doesn't feel like an essential. That's fair enough. But furniture, I think, was listed as well. I mean, some furniture, I guess, is something you just want, but there's plenty of furniture you need.
That's right. Look, no doubt there were many Australians who did really need this money and did access it in order to support themselves through a very difficult time. But I think what the data shows is that, in fact, the scheme was very broad, the criteria were loose, and the application process was easy. And for that reason, a lot of people's retirement savings have been taken to spend on discretionary and lifestyle spending at this time, and that's going to be very costly for them in the future.